The day started like any other for the boy. It was a warm afternoon, the kind of afternoon where the sun hung lazily in the sky, and people moved about slowly, trying to escape the heat. The streets of his neighborhood were busy with children, running around, mothers calling them back inside, and the occasional car driving past. He had his backpack slung over his shoulder, his shoes worn from too many long walks, but his mind was at ease. For him, this was just another day, nothing special, nothing unusual. But fate often works in strange ways. Sometimes it takes an ordinary day and flips it upside down in a single moment. And for this boy, that moment came when he heard a loud, startling crash. The sound echoed from the road nearby, sharp and heavy like metal twisting against metal. His steps froze for a second. He wasn't sure if he had imagined it, but then he saw smoke rising from the trees near the bend in the road. His heart gave a sudden jump. Without thinking, his feet began to move faster, almost as if his body knew what to do before his mind could catch up. He hurried down the narrow path that cut through the grass, and as he came closer, he saw it. A car, a large black one, smashed against a tree. The front was completely ruined. Glass shattered everywhere and smoke leaked from under the hood. The sound of a horn stuck on repeat blared into the air, adding to the chaos of the moment. For a second, he just stood there, frozen. He was only a teenager, after all. His mind raced. What if the car exploded? What if he got hurt? What if he wasn't strong enough to help? But then another thought struck him. What if someone was inside? What if someone was dying, and he was the only one there to help? That thought pushed away the fear. He ran closer, ignoring the heat radiating from the damaged vehicle. Through the broken glass, he saw a man slumped over the steering wheel. The man's face was bruised, his forehead bleeding slightly, and his body wasn't moving. The boy's pulse quickened. He banged on the window, shouting, hoping the man would wake up, but there was no response. The smoke was getting thicker now, and his chest began to burn with every breath. The door wouldn't open. He pulled, yanked, and tugged at it, but the metal was twisted and stuck. His hands began to hurt, but he didn't stop. He knew he didn't have much time. He looked around desperately and noticed a rock by the side of the road. He grabbed it with both hands and swung it hard against the glass. The window cracked but didn't shatter. He hit it again, his arms trembling with effort until finally the glass gave way, spilling tiny shards across the ground. The smoke was pouring thicker now. His throat burned as he reached inside, carefully avoiding the sharp edges of the window. He tried to shake the man awake, but still there was no response. He reached across, unbuckled the seatbelt, and began pulling with all his strength. The man was heavy, much heavier than the boy had expected. His heart raced. Every second felt like an hour, and he could hear the faint sound of people gathering in the distance. Some shouted for help, others gasped, but none came close. They were too afraid. But the boy didn't stop. His arms ached, his back screamed in pain, but he kept pulling. Finally, after what felt like forever, he managed to drag the man halfway out of the car. The man's legs were still caught under the dashboard. The boy gritted his teeth and gave one last strong pull, and with a loud crack of metal shifting, the man slid free. The two of them fell to the ground, the boy gasping for air, his chest heaving, his arms trembling. He looked back at the car just in time to see flames starting to lick at the hood. The crowd shouted louder now, but no one dared to go near. He dragged the man farther away from the car, inch by inch, until they were a safe distance away. His clothes were dirty, his hands scratched and bleeding, but he didn't care. All he cared about was whether the man was alive. He pressed his ear close to the man's chest, praying for a heartbeat. And then, there it was. Faint, but steady. Relief washed over him. The boy sat back, his body shaking with exhaustion. Around him, people whispered, amazed. They pointed, some even clapped, but he barely noticed. All he could think about was the man lying on the ground, still unconscious but breathing. A siren wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. The ambulance was on its way. The boy stood up, brushing dirt from his clothes, his legs unsteady. He didn't want attention. He didn't want people asking questions. He was just glad the man was alive. Quietly, while everyone's eyes were On the flames and the approaching emergency vehicles, he slipped away. As he walked down the path back toward his neighborhood, his heart was still racing. He didn't tell anyone what he had done. He didn't need to. To him, it wasn't about being a hero or making the news. It was simply the right thing to do. But what he didn't know was that the man he had saved was not just anyone. He was one of the richest men in the city, someone whose face had appeared on television and in newspapers many times. And soon, the boy's life, which had been so ordinary just a few hours ago, would be changed in ways he could never have imagined. For now, though, he walked slowly, his backpack still hanging from his shoulder, his hands sore, his mind tired. To him, it was just another day, another walk home. But in truth, the story of what he had just done was only beginning to unfold. The boy's hands shook as he stood over the man lying on the ground. His chest rose and fell in uneven breaths, but at least he was alive. The boy's own lungs burned from the smoke, and his arms felt heavy from pulling so hard. Yet he couldn't stop watching the man, almost as if his life now depended on it too. The crowd that had gathered kept a distance, whispering among themselves, too nervous to come closer. It was strange, everyone was there. But in that moment it felt like he was completely alone. The car behind him groaned as if it had a life of its own. Metal bent and popped. Flames crawled along the sides, and the thick black smoke curled into the sky. The heat was so strong that the boy could feel it against his back even as he stood several feet away. He knew he had pulled the man out just in time. Any later and things might have ended very differently. His mind raced. What if the man stopped breathing? What if he had an injury that wasn't visible? The boy crouched down and tried to wake him. He tapped his shoulder gently at first, then harder, but there was no reaction. Panic rose in his chest. He had done so much already, yet it felt like it wasn't enough. The sirens that had seemed far away earlier were now closer. Their wail cut through the noise of the crowd, but still the boy kept his eyes fixed on the man. He noticed the faint cuts on his face, the blood trickling from his forehead, and the deep lines of age that made him look tired even in unconsciousness. The boy had no idea who he was saving. To him, he was just a stranger whose life mattered. Finally, the ambulance screeched to a stop and the paramedics jumped out. Their boots hit the ground quickly, and they ran toward the scene with bags of equipment. One of them dropped to his knees beside the man and checked his pulse. The boy watched closely, his heart thudding in his chest until the paramedic nodded and said, "He's breathing, but weak. Let's get him on the stretcher." Relief washed over him, and for the first time since the crash, he let out a deep breath. His shoulders slumped, and he realized just how exhausted he really was. His shirt was damp with sweat, his arms cut in several places from the glass, and his legs trembled as if they might give way. But despite it all, there was a quiet sense of peace in his chest. He had done it. He had saved someone's life. While the paramedics worked, the boy tried to step back, hoping no one would notice him. He wasn't used to attention. He wasn't the kind of person who looked for praise or thanks. In fact, most of the time, people didn't notice him at all. He was just another face in the crowd, another kid in the neighborhood. But today, he had stepped into something much bigger without even realizing it. As he moved away, some of the onlookers started pointing at him. "That's the boy," one woman whispered.
He pulled him out.
Another voice followed. "Yeah, I saw it. He went right into the smoke. Didn't even think twice." Their words reached him and his cheeks grew warm. He didn't know what to do with their stares. Part of him wanted to vanish, to blend into the crowd. But another part of him felt a quiet pride he couldn't quite explain. The fire truck arrived moments later, and the firefighters rushed to put out the flames. Water sprayed over the car, hissing as it met the fire. The boy glanced back at the vehicle, now half-eaten by flames, and shivered at the thought of what might have happened if he hadn't acted. He imagined the man trapped inside, the fire spreading, the terrible silence that would have followed. He pushed the thought away quickly, not wanting to picture it. As the scene became busier with flashing lights and loud voices, the boy knew it was his time to leave. No one had asked for his name yet, and he preferred it that way. He turned, slipped quietly through the crowd, and began walking down the road, his backpack bouncing lightly against his shoulders. The walk home felt strange. Every step was heavy, but his heart was strangely light. He kept replaying the moment in his mind. The crash, the broken glass, the weight of the man in his arms. He could still feel the heat of the fire, still smell the smoke in his hair. It all felt unreal, like a scene from a movie he had been pulled into without warning. When he reached his neighborhood, everything looked the same. Children were still playing, neighbors were still talking on their porches, and the world kept moving as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The boy paused for a moment and looked around. How strange, he thought, that something so life-changing could happen, and yet the world around him would stay exactly the same. At home, he set down his backpack and went straight to wash his hands. The cuts stung as the water touched them, but he didn't complain. He didn't tell his family what had happened. They asked why he looked so tired, why his shirt was dirty, but he only shrugged it off and said he was fine. He didn't want them to worry. That night, as he lay in bed, sleep didn't come easily. He stared at the ceiling, thinking about the man. Was he awake now? Was he surrounded by family? Did he even know what had happened or who had pulled him out? The boy wondered if he would ever see him again, but deep down he doubted it. In his mind, this was just a passing moment, one act of courage that would soon be forgotten by the world. But the world has a way of remembering things when we least expect it. The boy thought the day was over. He had returned home, washed his hands, eaten with his family, and kept the story of the accident to himself. It wasn't that he wanted to hide what he had done. He simply felt it wasn't something to brag about. To him, helping someone in danger was natural. Why would anyone need to hear about it? He wasn't a hero, at least that's what he told himself. He was just a boy who happened to be in the right place at the right time. But fate once again had other plans. That evening after dinner, the house was quiet. His younger siblings played in the other room, their laughter filling the air. His mother sat by the window mending clothes by hand, humming softly. His father, tired from a long day of work, leaned back in his chair, half asleep. It was an ordinary picture of family life, peaceful and warm. The boy sat near the small table, scribbling on a notebook. He had schoolwork to finish, but his mind wasn't on it. His thoughts kept drifting back to the accident. He could still see the man's face, pale and motionless, still hear the sound of breaking glass, still feel the heat of the fire on his skin. He wondered if the man was awake now. He wondered if the family had been called, if someone was sitting beside him in the hospital, grateful that he had survived. These thoughts filled him with a quiet comfort, but also with a strange ache in his chest. He didn't know why. Maybe because he would never get answers. The man would never know who had pulled him out, and the boy would never know what happened after he left. Their paths had crossed only for a moment and then gone separate ways again. The boy looked up at the ceiling and sighed. That's life, he thought to himself. But suddenly the calm evening was shattered. It began with the sound of engines. At first it was distant, maybe just cars passing by. But then it grew louder, stronger, until the boy realized it wasn't just one car. There were several moving together. He frowned, confused, and turned his head toward the window. The rumbling grew louder, then stopped abruptly outside their small house. The boy's father straightened in his chair, suddenly alert. His mother put down the cloth she was stitching, her hands frozen mid-air. The laughter of his siblings stopped, replaced by curious silence. Then came the sound, car doors slamming one after another, boots against the ground, voices speaking firmly, giving orders. The boy's heart began to pound. Something was happening outside. A red and blue light flickered against the window, flashing across the room. His father's eyes widened and his mother pressed a hand to her mouth. Everyone knew what that light meant. Police. The knock came sharp and heavy against the door. Once, twice, 3 times. Not the gentle knock of a neighbor, but the kind of knock that made walls shake. The boy's siblings clung to each other, suddenly afraid. His father stood slowly, his jaw tight. His mother whispered, "What could they want here?" The boy's chest tightened. His mind raced through 1,000 possibilities. Had he done something wrong? Did they think he caused the accident? Fear twisted in his stomach. The knock came again, louder this time. A voice called out, "Open the door." His father walked to the entrance and pulled it open. Bright light flooded the small house, and for a moment, the boy could see the silhouettes of uniformed officers standing outside. Their cars lined the street. Neighbors peeking from behind curtains, whispering nervously. "Is this where he lives?" one officer asked, his father's brows furrowed. "Who are you looking for?" The officer's flashlight moved past him, scanning the room until it landed on the boy. The boy froze where he sat, his notebook still open, his pencil still in his hand. "That's him," the officer said firmly. The boy. The room went silent. His siblings looked at him with wide eyes. His mother gasped softly, and his father stepped back in confusion. The boy's heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. "What do you want with my son?" his father asked, his voice sharp. The officer stepped forward. "We're here to talk to him. It's important." The boy felt a rush of fear. Important? What did that mean? Were they here to arrest him? To blame him for the accident? His hands trembled on the table. He wanted to speak, to explain, but no words came out. The officers entered the house, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. The neighbors' whispers outside grew louder. The boy could imagine what they were saying. Why were the police here? What had the boy done? In their small community, news traveled fast and soon everyone would know. One officer crouched slightly, trying to meet his eyes. "Son," he said in a calmer voice, "we need you to come with us. You're not in trouble. We just need to take you somewhere. Not in trouble." But the boy didn't believe it. His mother rushed to his side, holding his arm protectively. "He's just a child," she said. "Tell us what this is about." The officer hesitated. "It's about the man from the accident. He's awake now. And he's asking for your son." The boy's heart skipped a beat. The man, he was alive? He remembered? The room filled with confusion and relief all at once. His mother's hand trembled as she held him tighter. His father's expression softened but remained cautious. The boy could hardly process it. All this time, he thought the man would never know who had saved him. And now the police were here, standing in his home because that man wanted to see him. The boy's stomach twisted with nerves. He wasn't ready for this. He hadn't wanted attention, hadn't wanted cameras or questions or police at his door. He only wanted to help and walk away quietly. But life was not giving him that choice. As the officers gently urged him toward the door, his siblings watched wide-eyed, whispering to each other. His mother hugged him tightly before letting go, her eyes filled with worry and pride at the same time. His father placed a firm hand on his shoulder and said, "Be brave." The boy stepped outside into the flashing lights. The cool night air hit his face, and he saw neighbors gathered in small groups, staring, murmuring. Some looked curious, others suspicious. He lowered his head, wishing the ground would swallow him. The police led him to their car, the doors opening with a heavy click. He climbed inside, his heart pounding louder with every second. As the car pulled away, he looked out the window at his small house, his family standing in the doorway and the rows of neighbors watching silently. He didn't know where they were taking him exactly. He only knew one thing for sure: his life would never be the same again. The car ride felt longer than it really was. The boy sat in the back seat of the police car, his hands resting nervously on his knees. The lights outside flashed across his face as they passed street after street. His heart was beating fast and his mind wouldn't stop racing. He kept wondering the same things again and again. Where were they really taking him? Why did the man want to see him? Was this a good thing or a bad thing? The officers in the front spoke quietly to each other, but he couldn't make out the words. All he could hear was the steady hum of the engine and the sound of his own breathing. He pressed his forehead lightly against the cool glass of the window, staring at the blur of lights outside. It felt strange to be sitting there, to be the center of so much attention, when only that morning he had been nothing more than a boy on his way home from school. Finally, the car turned into a wide driveway lit with bright lamps. The boy's eyes widened as he saw the large building in front of him. It wasn't a police station. It was a hospital. The tall glass windows glowed in the night, and the entrance bustled with nurses, patients, and visitors. Ambulances stood in line, their sirens off but their lights faintly flashing. The boy's chest tightened. It was true then. They had brought him here because of the man. The officer in the passenger seat turned back toward him. "Don't be nervous. You're not in trouble. Someone inside has been waiting to see you." His voice was calm, almost kind. The boy nodded, though his throat was too dry to answer. When they pulled up to the entrance, one of the officers opened the door for him. The boy stepped out, the cool night air brushing against his face once again. He felt smaller than ever in front of the towering hospital. The doors slid open with a whoosh and suddenly he was inside, surrounded by bright white lights, the smell of medicine, and the sound of footsteps echoing down the halls. The officers led him through the building. Nurses glanced at him curiously, and a few whispered to each other. The boy kept his eyes low, not wanting to meet anyone's gaze. His shoes squeaked softly against the polished floor as they walked. He felt as if he was walking toward something huge, something that would change everything. Finally, they stopped outside a room. The officer knocked gently and then pushed the door open. Inside, the boy saw him. The man from the accident was lying in the hospital bed, propped up with pillows. His head was bandaged and his arm was in a sling, but his eyes were open now, sharp, alive, and focused. For a moment, the boy froze in the doorway, unsure of what to do. The man's gaze moved toward him. Then slowly a faint smile spread across his face. "That's him," the man said, his voice a little weak but steady. "That's the boy who pulled me out." The officer stepped aside, leaving the boy standing there, his hands clutched together nervously. The man raised a hand slightly, motioning him closer. "Come here, son." The boy hesitated for a second, then slowly walked forward. His heart thudded with every step. He reached the side of the bed and looked down at the man. For the first time, he noticed details he hadn't before. The fine watch still on his wrist, the expensive ring on his finger, the neat cut of his hair. This man wasn't ordinary. He carried an air of importance, even in a hospital gown. The man reached out and placed his hand gently on the boy's arm. "You saved my life," he said softly. "I owe you everything." The boy shook his head quickly. I just did what anyone would have done." The man chuckled faintly, though it made him wince in pain. "No, son." People were standing there. They were watching. But only you stepped forward. You risked yourself for me. That's not something just anyone does. The boy lowered his eyes, unsure how to respond. Compliments like that made him uncomfortable. He had never been in a position where people looked at him like this with gratitude and admiration. The man's voice grew steadier as he went on. "Do you even know who I am?" The boy shook his head. The man gave a small smile. "I'm someone who has more money than I could ever spend, more houses than I could ever live in, and more people working for me than I can even remember. People call me successful. They call me powerful. But yesterday all of that almost ended in a single moment. None of it mattered when I was trapped in that car. And then you appeared, a boy with nothing but courage." His eyes softened. "Do you see why I say I owe you everything?" The boy looked at him, still silent, but something stirred in his chest. Hearing those words made him realize the weight of what had happened. He hadn't just saved a man. He had saved someone whose life touched many others, someone the world paid attention to. The man squeezed his arm gently. "What's your name?" The boy told him. The man repeated it slowly, as if memorizing it. "I'll never forget that name, never." For a moment, there was silence in the room. The boy felt the man's gratitude like a heavy blanket around him. He didn't know what to say, but he didn't need to. The look in the man's eyes said enough. The officers, who had been standing quietly by the door, finally spoke. "We'll give you two some time." They stepped out, leaving the room quieter, more personal. The man looked at the boy again. "You may not realize it yet, but what you did changed my life. And it's going to change yours too." The boy blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" The man gave a faint smile. "You'll see soon enough." The boy stayed there for a while longer, listening as the man spoke about the accident, about how everything had gone dark, until he woke up here in the hospital. He admitted he didn't remember much after the crash, only the faint feeling of being pulled, dragged through smoke and fire, and then air filling his lungs again. "That was you," he said firmly, "and I'll never let the world forget it." By the time the boy left the hospital room, his head was spinning. The man's words echoed in his mind, heavy and overwhelming. He didn't understand what would come next, but he felt it deep inside. His life had just shifted in a way he could not yet explain. The night air outside was cool and quiet when the officers walked him back to the car. But inside the boy's chest, everything was racing. He was no longer just a face in the crowd, no longer just another boy walking home with a backpack. He was the one who had saved a life, and not just any life, and the world was about to know it. The car ride home after leaving the hospital felt unreal to the boy. The flashing city lights blurred past, but he couldn't focus on them. His mind kept replaying the man's words, the way he had looked at him, the quiet gratitude that had shone in his eyes. It was heavy and bright at the same time, a feeling he couldn't quite name. He didn't understand how one single act, one decision to help someone in danger could change everything. Yet sitting there in the back of the car, he felt it. Something in his life had shifted. When the officers pulled up to his neighborhood, the streets were quieter than earlier that day. Some neighbors had seen the police cars and already begun whispering. From behind curtains, eyes peeked out. Children pressed their faces to glass and adults spoke in hushed voices. The boy felt their gaze as he stepped out of the car. For a moment, he wished he could disappear into the night, back into his small home away from all the attention, but he didn't. He walked carefully, the officers flanking him until he reached his front door. His family rushed out as soon as they saw him. His younger siblings hugged him tightly, their small arms barely reaching around his torso, and his mother's eyes were full of tears, both worry and pride mixing together. His father placed a steady hand on his shoulder, silent, but the pride in his gaze was clear. The boy felt a lump in his throat. "It's okay," he whispered, though he wasn't entirely sure if it was true. He wasn't sure it would ever feel okay, not after what had happened, not after everything that had changed. Later that night, as the boy sat quietly on the porch, the street finally calm, he thought about the day. Every detail kept returning to him. The sound of metal crashing, the smoke curling up from the car, the weight of the man's body in his arms, the fire that could have consumed everything in seconds. And then finally the man's face in the hospital, alive, looking at him like he was more than just a boy. It was hard to believe it all really happened. The next morning, the story had spread throughout the community. By the time the boy went outside, neighbors were waiting to congratulate him. Some clapped, some shook his hand, and some simply stared in awe. He felt embarrassed. He hadn't done this for fame or recognition, and suddenly it seemed like the world had noticed anyway. One neighbor, an older woman who had always treated him kindly, came forward. "You're a brave young man," she said, her voice warm. "What you did? It's more than anyone could ask for." The boy shrugged, looking down at his shoes. "I just helped him," he said softly. "That's all." But the woman didn't let it go. "No, son. What you did was more than helping. You saved a life. And that changes everything for you, for him, and for everyone who hears your story." By mid-morning, the millionaire himself appeared at the neighborhood. He had insisted on meeting the boy properly this time, not in a rush, not in the chaos of emergency lights and hospital staff. His car pulled up sleek and shiny, drawing attention immediately. But the boy barely noticed it. He only saw the man step out, walking slowly with a kind smile on his face. The man approached the boy directly. "I wanted to see you," he said simply. His voice carried warmth, and the boy felt it immediately. "You saved my life. You have no idea what that means to me." The boy swallowed, unsure of what to say. Words seemed too small, too weak for the enormity of the moment. The man continued. "I know you're humble. You think you just did what anyone would do. But the truth is, not everyone has the courage you showed. You acted when it mattered most. That courage, it's rare." The boy looked up, meeting the man's eyes. They weren't judging him, or looking at him like he owed them anything. Instead, there was gratitude, deep and real. "I want to help you," the man said. "I want to make sure your future is bright." "You deserve that." The boy's eyes widened. He had never imagined something like this. His family had always struggled to make ends meet. School fees, food, bills, they were constant challenges. And now this man, a person who could give almost anything in the world, was offering help. "You don't have to do this," the boy said, voice trembling slightly. "I didn't save you for this reason." The man shook his head. "I know, and I'm not asking you to. But you deserve more opportunities in life than the world usually offers someone like you. Let me help you in whatever way I can. Education, resources, guidance, whatever you need." His words left the boy quiet for a moment. He thought about his little siblings, about his mother sewing late at night, about his father working until his hands hurt. Maybe this was not just about him anymore. Maybe this chance could change not just his life, but theirs too. Over the next few weeks, the boy's life slowly began to shift. He started receiving letters, invitations, and opportunities he had never imagined. Scholarships, mentorship programs, and even small internships, all offered to him because of his bravery. But despite all of it, he remained humble. He never wanted to be seen as a hero. To him, helping someone in danger was simply the right thing to do. The man visited often, not with the intention of showing off his wealth, but to personally encourage the boy. "Courage matters more than money," he would say. "Intelligence matters more than fame. And kindness. Kindness changes everything." Word of the boy's act spread further, reaching local newspapers, television stations, and social media. Everyone was talking about the brave teen who had rescued a millionaire from a burning car. Yet despite the attention, the boy continued his normal life as much as possible. He went to school, helped at home, studied late into the night. He didn't let fame distract him. He also started to understand something important, that one act of courage could ripple out, touching countless lives in ways he couldn't have imagined. The man he saved now had the chance to live fully, to continue helping others, to continue influencing the world in his way. And the boy, in return, was given opportunities to grow, to learn, to dream bigger than he ever thought possible. In the evenings, when the chaos of the day had faded, the boy would sit quietly with his family. He would help his siblings with homework, tell small stories, laugh at little jokes, and remember that despite everything that had changed, life was still life. He still loved the ordinary things, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery nearby, the sound of children playing, the warmth of his mother's hug. And yet, he also carried a new understanding. Courage, kindness, and quick thinking, these things mattered. They mattered more than wealth, more than fame, more than power. One person's actions could change the world, and sometimes, the most ordinary people could do the most extraordinary things. The community celebrated him quietly, respecting his humility while acknowledging his bravery. Teachers, neighbors, and even strangers would smile and say, "That's the boy who saved a life." And every time he would simply nod, offering a shy smile. He didn't need recognition, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done the right thing. The millionaire continued to support him, ensuring his education and future were secure. But more than that, he became a mentor, showing the boy that success was not just about money, but about heart, courage, and integrity. Years later, the boy would remember that day with vivid clarity, the sound of the crash, the heat of the fire, the weight of the man in his arms, the fear and the adrenaline. But he would also remember the gratitude, the lessons learned, and the way a single act of courage had changed everything, not just for the man in the car, but for himself, his family, and his community. And in the quiet moments, when he thought about it, he would smile, knowing that in one instant he had chosen to act, he had chosen to be brave, and that choice had shaped the rest of his life.